The moment she smiled across the small cafe table, balancing confidence with curiosity, something old and bruised tightened in his chest, the kind of ache that only comes from years of being underestimated. He had walked into that room as a single father carrying quiet failures, sleepless nights, and a love so fierce it scared him. And now here he was, facing a woman whose teasing eyes seemed to say she already knew his limits. The title of his life had been written by others for too long, and this moment felt like the page where everything could finally change. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet strength of people who keep going even when the world doubts them, take a second right now to like this video, comment your thoughts, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel Brightly Kindness. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts that need them. He had not always been this careful, this guarded. Years earlier, his life had been loud with plans and promises, full of shared dreams that collapsed overnight when responsibility arrived without warning and love left without explanation. Becoming a single dad was not a heroic decision he proudly announced. It was something that happened when he chose to stay while someone else walked away. The days that followed were a blur of tiny socks, hospital bills, and learning how to cook meals that did not come from boxes. Friends slowly disappeared, invitations stopped coming, and conversations with adults became rare luxuries squeezed between bedtime stories and alarm clocks that rang too early. Society saw him as unfinished, a man defined by absence instead of presence. The cafe was warm and softly lit, the kind of place where people came to talk about dreams instead of survival. She sat across from him with a glass of water resting lightly in her hand, studying him with interest that felt both flattering and dangerous. She had a life that looked polished from the outside, steady work, time for hobbies, laughter that came easily. When she teased him about being a single dad, it was not cruel, but it landed on every insecurity he had tried to bury. He had learned to accept lowered expectations, to smile politely when people assumed his life was small. Yet something in her gaze stirred a quiet defiance, a reminder that his story was not over. What she could not see was the weight he carried into that moment. Every decision he made was filtered through the needs of a child who depended on him completely. Dadding felt like a risk, not to his heart, but to the fragile stability he had built. He had promised himself that anyone allowed close would have to understand the late nights, the canceled plans, the way his phone was always on. He had learned strength in ways that never made headlines, strength measured in patience, consistency, and the courage to show up every single day. As the evening unfolded, the teasing gave way to something softer. She listened when he spoke about parenthood without complaint or self-pity, about the way love could be exhausting and beautiful at the same time. He did not perform or exaggerate. He simply existed as he was. That honesty shifted the air between them. The challenge was no longer about proving himself to her, but about allowing himself to be seen without armor. For the first time in years, he felt the possibility of being chosen not in spite of his life, but because of it. The real test did not come in that cafe, though. It arrived in the days that followed, when reality pressed in with its usual demands. A sick child meant sleepless nights. A missed call meant rescheduled plans. The fragile hope that had begun to bloom now faced the familiar fear of disappointment. He expected her interest to fade, expected the polite distance that usually followed once people realized how complicated his life was. Instead, she surprised him by leaning closer, not physically, but emotionally. She asked questions that mattered. She showed patience that felt rare and sincere. Slowly, the story shifted. He found himself smiling more, standing a little taller, not because someone else completed him, but because someone finally recognized the value of what he already was. He realized that being a single dad had not broken him. It had forged him. The responsibility that once felt like a burden now felt like proof of his capacity to love deeply and selflessly. The challenge was no longer survival, but trust, the willingness to believe that good things could still happen. The turning point came quietly, without grand gestures. It came in moments of shared understanding, in the way she respected his priorities, in how she saw his child not as baggage but as part